The road stretched for miles under the open Texas sky, and I remember thinking I'd never seen a horizon so wide. Dust trailed behind my old truck as I drove toward the Hargrove Ranch, the place I hoped would give me a clean start. I wasn't running from the city as much as I was running from myself, from the noise, from a relationship that ended without warning. All I wanted was quiet, and I figured a ranch in the middle of nowhere would give me that. When I pulled up to the main gate, a man on horseback was waiting. He sat tall, steady, the brim of his hat shading his face from the sun. "You must be the new hand," he called out. His voice carried that kind of authority that made you stand straighter without meaning to. "Name's Jack Lawson. I run things around here." I stepped out of the truck and shook his hand. His grip was firm, rough from years of work. There was something steady about him, a calm confidence that made you want to listen when he spoke. He gave me a quick look, then motioned toward the stables. "Let's get you settled, city boy." The way he said it wasn't mocking, just matter of fact, like he'd already pegged me for someone who had a lot to learn. The first few days were harder than I expected. I woke up before sunrise, learned to saddle a horse, clean stalls, and haul feed until my arms ached. But there was something strangely peaceful about it. The rhythm of work, the sound of wind through the grass, the smell of rain on the dirt road. Jack was everywhere, giving quiet orders, fixing fences, moving cattle. Everyone respected him, and I could see why. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. He just worked, steady, sure, focused. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack found me struggling to lift a hay bale onto the truck. He laughed quietly, then grabbed the other end. "Use your legs, not your back," he said, setting it down with ease. I muttered something about getting stronger, and he just smiled. "You will." "Takes time." That small exchange shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. It was the first time in months that someone had spoken to me with patience instead of judgment. Over the next week, he started showing me little tricks, how to read the sky before a storm, how to keep a horse calm when it's spooked, how to tell when the herd's restless. He didn't talk much about himself, but I caught glimpses. A photo in his office of a woman and 2 dogs, the gold band on his hand when he reached for his hat. I figured the woman was his wife, but she wasn't around much. The house near the barn was always quiet, lights off by dusk. Sometimes I'd catch Jack looking out toward the fields long after the work was done. His face didn't give much away, but his eyes looked heavy, like he carried more than he let on. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. It wasn't my place. One night, I stayed late fixing a fence that had come loose after a windstorm. The sky was clear, the stars spread wide and bright. Jack showed up with a flashlight, said he didn't want me out there alone. We worked side by side for an hour, the only sounds the scrape of wire and the crickets in the grass. When our hands brushed as we reached for the same tool, neither of us said anything. It wasn't a moment full of meaning, just quiet, still, and strange. But it lingered longer than it should have. Afterward, he handed me a bottle of water and said, "Good work today." His voice was low, even. I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. Then he stepped back, cleared his throat, and said, "Get some rest. Tomorrow's gonna be longer." That night, lying in the bunkhouse, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that brief touch, the way his voice softened when he said my name earlier that day. It didn't make sense. I didn't even know him well. Maybe it was just the loneliness, or maybe it was the quiet way he carried himself that drew me in. Either way, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not attraction exactly, but connection. The next morning, Jack was already out by the stables, tying down a saddle. He looked up and nodded as I approached. "Morning, city boy," he said with a faint grin. The nickname had started to sound almost friendly. I smiled back, trying not to read too much into it. Out on the range that day, the sun was high and the air dry as dust. I rode behind Jack, watching the way he handled the reins, the easy rhythm of his movements. There was a grace to it, not practiced, just natural. When he turned to check if I was keeping up, our eyes met for a moment, before he looked away. By the time we headed back, the sky was orange, the air cooling down. I remember thinking how strange it was, to come all this way to escape the noise, only to find that the quiet could make you hear your own thoughts louder than ever. And lately, every thought seemed to drift toward one man. That evening, as I walked past the main house, I heard laughter from inside, Jack's voice, lighter than usual, probably on the phone with his wife. I told myself that was how it should be, that whatever was growing inside me had to stay where it belonged, unspoken, unseen. But deep down I knew something had already started, something I couldn't quite name. Days began to blend together in the slow rhythm of ranch life. Mornings came early with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee drifting through the bunkhouse. I started to feel more at home, more sure of my place out there among the horses and open sky. Jack didn't have to guide me as much anymore, but somehow he still found reasons to work alongside me. If another hand was fixing the corral, he'd ask me to ride the Northfield with him instead. No one questioned it, and I didn't either. The weather turned rough as summer pushed into storm season. You could see the thunderheads rolling in from miles away, the light changing from gold to steel gray in a matter of minutes. One afternoon we were out checking fences when the first drops began to fall. Jack looked at the sky, squinted, and said, "We won't make it back in time. There's a barn half a mile east." We made it there just as the rain broke loose, wind slamming the doors as we rushed inside. The sound of rain hitting the roof was deafening. We sat on opposite sides of the old barn, water dripping from our jackets. Jack lit a small lantern he carried in his saddlebag, its glow turning the air warm and soft. For a while neither of us said a word. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Storms come fast here," he said quietly. "You get used to them after a while." "I don't mind it," I said. "Feels honest. The city hides everything. Here the sky shows you exactly how it feels," he smiled faintly. "Never heard it put like that." He paused, looking at me through the flicker of the lantern. "You ever think about going back?" I shrugged. "Sometimes, but there wasn't much left to go back to." I hesitated, then added, "I guess I just needed space to remember who I was." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Space'll do that. Gives you time to notice what's missing." His words hung in the air. The rain softened, but the silence between us grew heavier. He looked away first, fiddling with a piece of straw. "You'll do fine here," he said after a while. "You've got good instincts." The compliment caught me off guard. "Thanks," I said. "Means a lot coming from you." He gave a small nod, then stood and walked to the door. For a moment he looked out into the rain like he was trying to clear his head. "I should check the horses," he said. When he passed by me, our shoulders brushed. It was nothing, a split second of contact, but it left my chest tight. I told myself it was just the cold or the nerves or the quiet. But even after he walked away, I could still feel that moment, small and electric, echoing longer than it should have. When the storm eased, we saddled up and rode back in silence. The world smelled of wet grass and cedar. By the time we reached the main barn, dusk had fallen, and the ranch lights flickered like small stars in the distance. As we unsaddled the horses, Jack looked over and said softly, "You did good today." "Most folks panic in that kind of weather," I smiled, unsure what to say. "Guess I'm learning." "You are," he said. Then quieter. "Maybe faster than I expected." The next morning, a pickup truck pulled into the yard. A woman stepped out, slim brown hair tied back, wearing a denim jacket that matched the dust on her boots. I recognized her from the photo in Jack's office, Sarah. She smiled at me politely when Jack introduced us. "You must be Ethan," she said. "Jack's told me you're picking things up quick." Her tone was friendly, but I noticed the way her eyes flicked toward Jack when she spoke, like she was searching for something in his face. Jack kept his expression steady, though there was a tension under the surface, a weight in the pauses between them. Sarah stayed for a few days. She helped cook, talked with the ranch hands, laughed easily. But when she and Jack were alone, the laughter faded. Once I passed by the porch at night and heard them talking, not arguing, but quiet and tired, like two people who had said everything there was to say years ago. That night, I lay awake again, the sounds of the ranch soft in the dark. I told myself it was none of my business, but part of me wondered if Jack had always been this quiet, or if silence had grown around him over time, like a fence too high to climb. The next evening, after Sarah went inside, Jack joined me by the stables. We watched lightning flash far off in the distance, silent and distant. "She'll be heading back tomorrow," he said. I nodded, unsure how to respond. "She seems nice. She is," he said after a pause. "We've just grown different. Happens sometimes." He didn't look at me when he said it. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry." He gave a half smile. "Don't be. Life's not about what you hold on to. It's about what you can live with after." The words sank into me like rain into dry soil. For a long time, we stood there in silence. The air was cool, the sky wide and full of stars. I could feel the distance between us and still sense something pulling closer. Not through words, not through touch, but through understanding. When he finally turned to leave, Jack said quietly, "You should get some rest." As he walked away, the lantern light stretched his shadow long across the dirt. I watched until it disappeared behind the barn. I knew then that something was changing between us, even if neither of us dared to name it. Whatever it wasn't simple, and it wasn't safe. But it was real. The summer heat broke slowly, giving way to cool mornings and long, quiet evenings. The ranch had settled into a steady rhythm again, chores, rides, the hum of cicadas. Sarah had left a week earlier, leaving behind a kind note for the kitchen staff and a silence around Jack that everyone seemed to notice, but no one mentioned. He worked harder than ever, always out before dawn, always the last one in. And most days he asked me to ride with him. We didn't talk about much, at least not directly. There were moments when I wanted to ask him what was happening in his head. If he felt the same pull I did, that strange closeness that lived between words. But every time I thought about it, he'd say something simple like, "Pass the rope," or "We've got to move the herd by sundown," and the moment would pass. One morning, Mr. Hargrove announced the annual cattle drive was coming up, a long trek across open range to move the herd before the season turned. Jack took charge, organizing the hands, assigning routes. When he gave me my post, he paused for a second. "You'll ride with me," he said. "Could use another pair of eyes." We set out before sunrise. The sky was pale gold, the herd moving slow and restless. There were 6 of us in all, but most of the time, it felt like it was just the 2 of us, riding ahead, calling out, working in perfect rhythm. Sometimes, it was like he knew what I was about to do before I did it. It felt easy, natural, and that scared me more than anything. By midday, the sun was high and sharp. Dust clung to our clothes and the air shimmered with heat. Jack rode beside me, his hat low, his face hidden in shadow. After a long silence, he said, "You've done good here, Ethan. You should be proud." "Thanks," I said. "Guess I had a good teacher." He smiled faintly. "I doubt you needed much teaching. You just needed a place to breathe." That stayed with me for a while. Out there, surrounded by sky and land that never seemed to end, I realized he was right. The ranch had given me something I didn't know I needed, a sense of belonging, even if temporary. But deep down, I also knew that belonging came with a cost. That evening, we camped near a small creek. The others drifted to sleep early, leaving Jack and me by the fire. Sparks floated up into the dark, the sound of water running just beyond the light. He stared into the flames for a long time before saying, "Sarah called earlier. She's staying with her sister for a while." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He went on, voice low, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "We've been trying to fix things for years, but some things don't go back the way they were." I looked at him, his face lit by the fire's edge. There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet acceptance. "I'm sorry," I said. He turned to me then, eyes steady, searching. "Don't be. It's life," he paused. "But you? Don't let it harden you. People will hurt you, and you'll hurt people too, but don't lose the part of you that still wants to care." The words hit deeper than I expected. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, he stood and tossed the last bit of wood into the fire. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with the sound of the creek and the memory of his voice. The next day, a stray steer broke off from the herd and bolted toward a rocky slope. I went after it without thinking, the horse's hooves slipping on loose gravel. I nearly lost my balance when Jack appeared beside me, catching my reins and steadying the horse. For a split second, our eyes met, the shock, the relief, and something else neither of us could disguise. Then he let go, turning away quickly. "Be careful," he said. "Don't make me chase you again." When we returned to the ranch that evening, the drive was over. Everyone was exhausted but proud. As the others headed toward the bunkhouse, Jack walked with me to my truck. "You heading out soon?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I think so. Time to figure out what's next." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "You did good, city boy." I shook it, feeling the weight of everything unspoken between us. "Thanks for giving me a chance," I said. He smiled, small, sad, and sincere. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." "You too, Jack." I climbed into the truck, and as I started the engine, I glanced back. He was standing by the fence, hat in hand, watching as I drove down the long dirt road. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in gold and red. For a second, I almost stopped, almost said something, almost asked him to. But some things are meant to stay where they are. As the ranch disappeared in the rearview mirror, the wind through the open window carried the faint scent of rain and hay. I thought about everything that had happened, everything that hadn't. Some people come into your life and change you without ever touching you. They leave a mark that doesn't fade, a lesson you keep even when the memory grows quiet. Jack was that for me, a reminder that sometimes the strongest connections are the ones we never name. The road stretched out ahead, endless and open. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to find out. The sky turned darker, and I drove on, the sound of the wind fading into the kind of silence that no longer felt empty, just peaceful.